What if I told you that the biggest reason you're not where you want to be isn't because of bad luck, lack of talent, or even lack of effort? It's because every single day, you're walking straight into traps you can't even see. Traps that feel normal, comfortable, even justified, but they are quietly stealing your time, your confidence, and your future. Most people imagine that if they're working hard, progress is inevitable. But Stephen Covey used to remind us, if the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. That's what these traps do. They give you the illusion of moving forward while pulling you further away from the life you want. Think about it. Have you ever wondered why some days feel so exhausting yet so unproductive? Why weeks, months, even years can go by and you still feel like you're in the same place? It's because you've been caught, repeatedly, by habits and mindsets designed to hold you exactly where you are. And here's the dangerous part. They rarely announce themselves. They blend into your routine so perfectly that you can live inside them for decades without realizing it. Over the next few minutes, we're going to expose 7 of these traps, one by one. You'll see how they disguise themselves as harmless daily choices. You'll understand why they have such a powerful hold on you. And more importantly, you'll learn how to dismantle them before they dismantle your potential. I'm not talking about minor inconveniences here. These traps have the power to shape your identity, limit your decisions, and quietly kill your ambition. They don't just slow your progress. They rewrite the story of your life without your permission. If you've been feeling stuck, if you've been wondering why your effort isn't matching your results, then what you're about to hear might be the turning point you've been waiting for. But I want you to pay attention to something as we go along. Some of these traps will feel uncomfortably familiar. You might even feel defensive, because it's hard to admit when we've been the ones keeping ourselves from moving forward. That's natural. Don't fight that feeling. Let it open your eyes instead of closing them. Because the moment you can see a trap for what it really is, you've already taken the first step to breaking free from it. And here's the twist. Not all of these traps look like failure. Some of them look like success. They wear the mask of being responsible or playing it safe. They convince you that you're doing the right thing when in reality, you're trading your dreams for comfort you won't even remember in 10 years. By the time we reach the last trap, you'll not only be able to spot them, you'll have a way to start dismantling them immediately. And if you can break even one of them this week, the ripple effect on your life will be impossible to ignore. So, before we step into the first one, I want you to think about this. If one hidden trap can cost you a year of your life without you realizing it, how many years have you already lost? The answer might sting, but it's the kind of sting that wakes you up. And once you're awake, you can never go back to sleep in the same way again. Now, let's start pulling back the curtain, beginning with a trap that almost everyone has fallen into at least once, and many never escape. There's a strange truth about human behavior. We will tolerate almost anything if it's familiar. You can be deeply unhappy in your job, your relationship, or your daily routine, yet still cling to it because at least you know what to expect. There's a perverse comfort in misery you understand. Stephen Covey would call this choosing the known over the possible. It's the invisible chain that keeps people anchored to situations they complain about every day, yet never take meaningful steps to change. Why? Because the unknown feels dangerous, even if it's exactly where your growth is hiding. Think about this for a moment. How many people do you know who stay in careers that drain them, telling themselves they'll leave when things get really bad? As if slowly bleeding your energy isn't bad enough. Or people who stay in toxic friendships because it's easier than facing the discomfort of being alone for a while. We think our biggest fear is failure. In reality, our biggest fear is uncertainty. The mind is a master negotiator when it wants to keep you safe. It will whisper things like, "At least you know what you're dealing with here," or "It's not perfect, but it could be worse." And in those moments, you agree. You choose the devil you know over the possibility of something better. Not because you believe this is the best life you can live, but because it feels safer to stay where you are than to face the risk of stepping into something new. Here's the trap. Familiar misery doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like stability. You convince yourself it's temporary, until you realize years have passed and nothing has changed. And by then, your identity has adapted to that small, safe box you've built around yourself. You've stopped seeing the walls because you've decorated them. I've seen it happen in the smallest of ways. A talented person stops applying for new opportunities because they don't want to start over. A creative mind stops experimenting because it's too much work to learn something new. A leader stops leading because it's easier to let things be. Each excuse sounds reasonable in the moment, but together, they form a life half-lived. Covey often reminded us that every significant change begins with a choice, one that often feels uncomfortable, inconvenient, and risky. He didn't sugarcoat it. You can't grow in the same soil that's been poisoning you. If you want new fruit, you have to plant yourself somewhere else, even if you don't yet know what the harvest will look like. The cost of staying in familiar misery isn't just lost time. It's lost capacity. The longer you remain in an environment that keeps you small, the harder it becomes to even imagine yourself being more. Your vision of what's possible starts to shrink. Your goals get smaller, not because you've achieved enough, but because you've stopped believing you can handle more. This trap works slowly. At first, you notice the discomfort, the frustration, the longing for something else. But as time passes, you stop fighting it. You settle. You create routines to make it bearable. You tell yourself you'll change when the timing is right. And yet, the timing never announces itself. There is no perfect moment. There's just the decision, made now or delayed forever. Breaking out of this trap requires a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "What might I lose if I change?" start asking, "What will I definitely lose if I stay?" That one question flips the power dynamic. Suddenly, the status quo isn't safe anymore. It's the real danger. It exposes the truth that staying where you are is not preserving your life. It's quietly wasting it. Let's make this real. Imagine two versions of you. The first keeps everything exactly as it is. Same job, same habits, same routines. Fast forward 5 years. What's changed? Probably nothing, except maybe your energy, which is now lower, and your belief in what's possible, which is weaker. The second version takes a risk, switches paths, learns something new, walks away from what's draining them. 5 years later, even if there were mistakes and setbacks along the way, this version is wiser, stronger, and closer to the life they wanted. Which version will you choose? It's not that the familiar is always bad. Stability has its place. But when stability comes at the expense of growth, it's no longer stability, it's stagnation. And stagnation always leads to decline. Here's the invisible loop that will serve you. Once you spot this trap in one area of your life, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In your work, your relationships, your habits. You'll notice how much of your routine isn't about joy or purpose. It's about avoiding discomfort. And that realization will do two things. It will make you restless, and it will prepare you for the next trap. Because while familiar misery keeps you in place, the next trap works differently. It doesn't just hold you still, it keeps you busy. It distracts you with movement that looks like progress, but leads nowhere. And that's where we're going next. One of the easiest ways to avoid confronting the truth about your life is to keep yourself endlessly busy. You fill your days with tasks, errands, meetings, and projects, and by the end of the day, you feel drained, maybe even accomplished, yet nothing meaningful has moved forward. Stephen Covey warned about this often. He called it climbing the ladder fast, only to find it's leaning against the wrong wall. In other words, activity alone doesn't equal progress. And yet, this is the trap so many of us fall into. We mistake motion for momentum. Busyness is seductive because it feels like you're in control. You're checking boxes, answering emails, attending calls, staying on top of things. But if you look closer, most of that activity is reactive, not proactive. You're responding to demands instead of directing your own path. You're consumed by the urgent while the important quietly rots in the corner, waiting for your attention. Here's the danger. The illusion of productive busyness doesn't just waste time, it steals clarity. You start believing that being exhausted means you've done something valuable. But exhaustion is not a measurement of progress. It's just proof that your energy was spent, not necessarily that it was spent well. Think of it this way. You can run all day on a treadmill and feel like you've been moving, but you end up in the same place you started. The scenery hasn't changed. The direction hasn't shifted. The only thing that's different is your level of fatigue. That's how most people live their weeks, months, and years. I've seen highly capable people trapped here for decades. They become masters of efficiency in things that don't matter. They're experts at solving problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. They feel important because they're needed, but in truth, they've become indispensable to systems and routines that are keeping them small. Covey's approach to escaping this trap is brutally simple. Identify your true priorities, the few things that, if done consistently, would make the biggest difference in your life, and protect them at all costs. That means learning to say no to things that look important but aren't aligned with your long-term vision. And that's harder than it sounds, because the illusion of busyness thrives on validation. People will praise you for being so dedicated and always available. But the applause of others can be the rope that keeps you tied to the wrong race. If you want to dismantle this trap, you have to do something most people won't. You have to slow down. Not in the sense of being lazy, but in the sense of creating space to think. Real progress requires reflection, and reflection can't happen in the chaos of constant motion. Start by asking yourself, if I stopped doing 50% of the things on my schedule, what would actually happen? Would my world collapse? Or would I finally have room to focus on what matters? You might discover that half of what you do exists only to keep up appearances, to look busy, to feel needed, to avoid uncomfortable questions about whether you're actually moving toward your goals. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If your schedule is always full, there's a good chance your life is empty of the things that really count. I remember hearing Covey say, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. That small shift changes everything. When you begin each day anchored in what truly matters, busyness loses its grip on you. You stop being impressed by a full calendar and start being impressed by meaningful outcomes. This isn't just about time management, it's about identity. A person addicted to busyness often feels uneasy in stillness. Silence feels like failure. But in reality, silence is where direction is found. It's where you can step back and see the traps for what they are. And here's the subtle risk. The longer you stay in this cycle of constant motion, the more it becomes part of who you are. You start defining yourself by how much you do instead of who you're becoming. And if you're not careful, that identity will be the very thing that resists change when you finally see the need for it. So pause, right now, and imagine what it would feel like to replace half of your frantic activity with intentional, focused action. To end a day tired because you moved the right things forward, not just because you kept everything spinning. That shift is possible, but there's a reason most people never make it. The trap that comes next isn't about being too busy. It's about being pulled in so many directions that you slowly lose the ability to decide where you actually want to go. If the first trap keeps you stuck in familiar misery, and the second keeps you too busy to notice, this one works on an even deeper level. It convinces you to live your life on someone else's terms. It starts innocently enough. A friend asks for a small favor. A colleague just needs 5 minutes of your time. Family members make requests that aren't really requests, they're expectations. And before you realize it, your calendar, your focus, and even your emotional energy are being shaped by what other people want, not what you've chosen. Stephen Covey used to point out that you have to decide what your highest priorities are and have the courage, pleasantly, smilingly, unapologetically, to say no to other things. It sounds simple, but in practice, most people struggle with it their entire lives. The trap here is subtle because it often feels like you're doing the right thing. Helping others, being available, saying yes when needed, these are good qualities. But when they become your default, without boundaries, they turn into chains. Every yes you give without thought is a no to something else, often something important to you. Here's how it usually unfolds. You start the day with clear intentions. You know what matters. But then, one by one, the demands arrive. Emails, texts, calls, questions. You respond immediately, telling yourself you'll get back to your priorities later. Hours pass. The day ends. And once again, your energy went to managing other people's plans while yours stayed untouched. Over time, this doesn't just waste days. It reshapes your identity. You stop thinking about your goals because you're too busy reacting to the needs of others. You begin to feel valuable only when you're solving someone else's problem. And slowly, without noticing, you start measuring your worth by how much you can give away. Covey would challenge you to think differently. Your time is a resource, and if you spend it entirely on others' agendas, you're not generous, you're bankrupting yourself. Healthy contribution comes from overflow, not depletion. You can't lead, create, or grow from a place where you're constantly drained. Breaking free from this trap requires a mental shift. It's not about becoming selfish, it's about becoming strategic. You need to start asking, does this request align with my vision? Or is it pulling me away from it? That one question can turn mindless agreement into intentional choice. I've seen people transform their lives just by learning to insert a pause before committing. That pause creates space to evaluate, to consider, to protect what's important. And yes, sometimes it will mean saying no to people you care about. But that no can be an act of respect for them and for you, because it ensures you're showing up at your best when you do say yes. This trap thrives on guilt, the fear that you'll disappoint someone, the worry that you'll seem cold or unhelpful. But the truth is, people who value you will respect your boundaries. Those who don't were never respecting you in the first place. One of Covey's most powerful ideas was that leadership starts with self-leadership. If you can't lead your own schedule, your own energy, your own decisions, you'll always be at the mercy of those who can. And the harsh reality is, there's no shortage of people ready to decide for you if you won't decide for yourself. Picture this, two versions of the same day. In the first, you respond to every request, every ping, every urgent need from others. By evening, you're exhausted, your work untouched, your mind scattered. In the second, you protect your first 2 hours for your most important goals. You still help others, but only after you've moved forward on what matters most to you. The difference in outcomes after a year is staggering. One version of you will still be talking about what they hope to do someday. The other will be living it. Protecting your time is protecting your life. Every commitment you make should be a conscious investment, not a reflex. And once you start treating it that way, you'll find that the noise begins to fade. The pull of other people's agendas loses its power when your own becomes non-negotiable. And yet, even when you reclaim your time from others, there's another force working against you. One that comes from inside, not outside. It's the quiet, persistent voice that convinces you to wait for the right moment before taking action. And that's where the next trap begins. There's a phrase that sounds responsible, even wise, but in reality, it quietly kills more dreams than fear ever could. I'll do it when the time is right. On the surface, it feels like patience. You tell yourself you're being smart, waiting for more experience, more money, more clarity, more stability. You convince yourself that the conditions have to be perfect before you take the leap. And while you're waiting, days turn into months and months into years. Stephen Covey often reminded us that timing is rarely the real problem. It's commitment. People hide behind the idea of the right time because it lets them avoid the discomfort of starting. The truth is, you're not waiting for the perfect moment. You're waiting for the moment you'll feel ready. And that moment doesn't exist. Here's the trap. Waiting feels safe because it keeps you from the possibility of failure. If you never start, you never risk embarrassment, loss, or regret. But what you don't realize is that by waiting, you're already experiencing loss. Loss of momentum, loss of opportunity, and most dangerously, loss of belief in yourself. I've seen this play out in countless ways. The aspiring entrepreneur who's been researching for 5 years without launching. The person who says they'll start taking care of their health when things settle down. The one who dreams of moving to a new city once the kids are older or after the next promotion. Life doesn't pause for your ideal conditions. The calendar keeps turning whether you act or not. Covey would argue that imperfect action beats perfect intention every time. You can refine, adjust, and improve along the way, but only if you're moving. Waiting for clarity before you start is like waiting to be fit before you go to the gym. The action creates the clarity, not the other way around. There's also an emotional cost to this trap. The longer you postpone something you know you want, the heavier it becomes. Every delay adds another layer of doubt. You start questioning whether you were ever capable in the first place. And eventually, the dream becomes so distant that it feels like it belongs to someone else. Breaking free from this mindset requires a hard shift. Stop asking, "When will I be ready?" and start asking, "What can I do today with what I have?" That question eliminates the illusion of perfect timing and forces you into movement. One strategy Covey emphasized was focusing on the first small step, the one thing you can do right now, without waiting for anything else. Once you take that step, you generate momentum, and momentum creates opportunities that didn't exist before. You'll never have all the resources, knowledge, or certainty you want up front, but you have enough to begin. Think about your own life. Is there something you've been telling yourself you'll do when things settle down? What would happen if you stopped waiting? What if you decided that now, not next month, not next year, was the time to start? You don't have to upend your entire life overnight. Starting can be as simple as making the call, sending the email, blocking the time in your calendar, or saying yes to an opportunity instead of postponing it. The action doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be real. And here's where this trap connects to the bigger picture. Waiting for the right time doesn't just delay your goals. It creates a pattern. If you wait once, it becomes easier to wait again. Before long, waiting becomes your default. You start applying it to everything: relationships, health, career, personal growth. And without noticing, you become an expert at standing still. If you've been stuck here, the most powerful thing you can do is break the pattern with a decision you act on today. Not next week. Not when you feel more confident. Today. Because here's the truth. The clock is still ticking, whether you move or not. And while you're waiting for the perfect conditions, someone else is out there starting with less than you have right now. And they're building the life you're still only imagining. It's not easy to face that reality. But if you can, you'll see that there's no such thing as the right time. There's only the time you decide to make right. And yet, even if you overcome the habit of waiting, there's another trap that can stop your progress in its tracks. It's not about hesitation. It's about the way you talk to yourself once you've actually started. You've taken the leap. You've started. But now, something else appears. Quiet, constant, and deeply personal. It's not an obstacle outside of you. It's the voice inside your own head that whispers, "Are you sure you can do this?" This trap is one of the most dangerous because it doesn't stop you from starting. It stops you from continuing. It's the relentless self-doubt that can make even your best efforts feel pointless. And unlike external challenges, you can't walk away from it. You carry it everywhere. Stephen Covey often spoke about the private victory, the inner work you must win before you can win in the public arena. This is exactly what he meant. If you're at war with your own mind, no amount of external progress will feel stable. Self-doubt has many disguises. Sometimes it's a straightforward fear of failure. Sometimes it's a constant comparison to others, seeing their results and deciding you'll never measure up. Sometimes it hides behind perfectionism, making you believe that nothing you do is good enough to share with the world. Here's the truth most people avoid. That voice will never disappear completely. Confidence isn't the absence of self-doubt. It's the decision to keep moving despite it. The trap is believing that the voice is a sign you're on the wrong path, when in reality, it's often proof you're stretching beyond your comfort zone. Think of the last time you hesitated to act because you questioned yourself. Maybe it was sending an idea to your boss, launching a project, or sharing something you created. You replayed every possible outcome in your head, most of them negative, until you convinced yourself to wait, or worse, to quit entirely. That's how this trap steals progress, not with big, dramatic failures, but with tiny, repeated hesitations. Covey's approach to dismantling it is both simple and uncomfortable. You have to build evidence against your own doubt, not by overthinking, but by acting and collecting real proof that you are capable. Every small win is a brick in the wall that protects you from the voice. And the faster you act, the less time the voice has to talk you out of it. One powerful method is reframing self-talk. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" start asking, "What if I succeed?" This shifts your brain's focus from protecting you from risk to preparing you for possibility. And when you operate from possibility, your actions change, your posture changes, your results change. You also need to recognize the pattern. Self-doubt thrives in isolation. When you keep your goals and struggles to yourself, the voice gets louder. But when you share them with people who support your growth, you create accountability and perspective. Sometimes, just hearing someone else say, "You're on the right track," is enough to quiet the noise long enough to move forward. But here's the catch. Self-doubt doesn't always sound negative. Sometimes it pretends to be reasonable. It tells you to be realistic, to slow down, to not get your hopes up. And because it sounds calm, you trust it. You follow its advice. And just like that, you're back in the comfort zone you fought so hard to leave. If you want to break this cycle, you have to learn to act faster than your doubt can react. Make the call. Send the email. Post the work. Sign up for the class. Do it before your brain builds the case against it. The more you practice this, the less intimidating that voice becomes. And here's something Covey would remind you. The voice inside you will speak for the rest of your life. But you get to decide which part of it you listen to. The part that fears or the part that believes. Imagine where you'd be right now if, for the past 5 years, you had acted on your best ideas immediately, without letting self-doubt negotiate them away. How different would your life look? That gap between where you are and where you could be, that's the tax you've been paying to this trap. And there's a reason we need to address this now. Because even if you learn to move despite self-doubt, there's another trap that can creep in. One that feels harmless at first, even comforting, but over time, it drains your discipline and makes your progress disappear. Progress feels good, and it should. The problem is when you let small wins become a substitute for the real change you're aiming for. You set a goal. You start moving. You get your first taste of improvement. Maybe you complete the first week of workouts. Maybe you land a small client. Maybe you finally stick to a new habit for 10 days straight. You feel proud, and you should. But then, without realizing it, you ease up. You tell yourself, I'm on the right track. I can relax a little now. Covey often warned about this. He explained that many people confuse progress with arrival. They mistake the early signs of success for the finish line. And this is dangerous because momentum is fragile. Once you slow down, getting it back takes far more effort than keeping it going. The comfort of small wins is a trap because it feels like reward. You've been working hard, so you let yourself celebrate. That's healthy. But then you celebrate again, and soon, you've shifted from building the habit to breaking it, one justified exception at a time. I've seen it happen in subtle ways. A person starts saving money, sees their account grow, and then treats themselves a little too often, undoing months of discipline. Someone starts waking up early, feels the benefits, and then tells themselves it's okay to sleep in just this once, which quietly becomes their new normal. Small wins should be fuel, not brakes. They should energize you to keep going, not convince you that you've done enough. Covey's approach here was simple. Always link a win to the next action, not to rest. If you complete a week of consistent action, use the pride from that win to plan the next week with even more clarity. Celebrate in a way that reinforces the habit, not one that undermines it. Why do we fall into this trap? Because early success relieves the pressure. The discomfort that was pushing us forward begins to fade, and our brain, wired for efficiency, seeks the easiest path back to comfort. It whispers, you've earned a break. And while breaks are important, there's a difference between strategic rest and unplanned drift. The real danger is that small wins can trick you into believing you've changed when you've only scratched the surface. Habits are not solidified by a few early victories. They're built through sustained repetition long after the excitement wears off. Think about this. If you stop feeding a fire the moment it starts burning bright, it doesn't keep growing, it dies out. The same is true for your progress. The early glow isn't proof you've succeeded, it's proof you've started. Breaking this trap requires intentional follow-through. Every time you hit a milestone, immediately set the next one. Don't let yourself float in the space between I started and I arrived. That's where momentum goes to die. And here's a practical way to guard against it. Create commitments that extend beyond your initial goal. If you're aiming for 30 days of a habit, schedule 60. If you want to reach a certain financial goal, plan what happens after you hit it. This forces your brain to keep thinking forward, not just congratulating itself for the past. This doesn't mean you can't celebrate. Celebration is powerful. It marks progress, builds confidence, and gives you energy. But celebrate with actions that align with your vision, not ones that pull you away from it. The comfort of small wins is particularly dangerous because it's invisible. No one will warn you about it. In fact, people will praise you for your progress. They'll tell you you're doing great, which makes the temptation to ease up even stronger. You'll have to be the one to notice when the celebration is starting to replace the work. Ask yourself right now, are you still pushing as hard as you did when you started? Or have you let the early results convince you that the work is done? Because here's the hard truth. In almost every story of success that lasted, the real transformation happened after the first visible wins, not before. Those early results are just the beginning. The question is, will you use them as proof to keep going or as permission to slow down? And this matters more than you think. Because the final trap we need to talk about doesn't just slow you down, it pulls you backward. It takes the progress you've made and slowly erases it. Until you're not just standing still, you're back where you started. The most dangerous trap isn't the one that stops you before you start. It's the one that waits patiently until you've made progress, then pulls you back to the very place you fought to escape. This trap works quietly. At first, you don't even notice it. You've built new habits, made changes, achieved results. You feel different. You are different. But then, something familiar starts to creep in. A small decision here, a skipped habit there. Maybe it's a busy week, an unexpected setback, or just the thought, I've earned a break. Covey would say that without a conscious effort to protect your new identity, you will default to your old one. That's because your old patterns are deeply wired. They've been rehearsed for years, maybe decades. And under pressure, the brain prefers what it knows, even if what it knows is the very thing that kept you stuck. This trap is particularly dangerous because it doesn't feel like failure at first. It feels like flexibility. You miss one workout, and it's no big deal. You delay a project, telling yourself you'll catch up. You let a negative habit back in, just for a day. But those small cracks widen quickly, and before you know it, you're living the same life you thought you left behind. I've seen this happen to disciplined, driven people. They hit their goals, only to slowly lose the habits that got them there. And because the decline is gradual, they don't realize how far they've slipped until they're right back at the start. Only this time, with the added weight of disappointment. The way to dismantle this trap is to understand that real transformation isn't about achieving a result. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally lives in alignment with that result. If you lose the result but keep the identity, you'll rebuild it. But if you lose the identity, the result won't last. Covey's approach was clear. Anchor your new behaviors to your sense of self. Instead of saying, "I'm trying to wake up early," say, "I'm the kind of person who starts the day with intention." Instead of, "I'm trying to manage my money better," say, "I'm the kind of person who stewards resources wisely." The more you link the habit to your identity, the harder it is to abandon it without feeling like you're abandoning yourself. Another key is to anticipate the moments when you're most vulnerable to slipping back. Change doesn't fail in moments of strength. It fails in moments of fatigue, stress, or distraction. If you know your weak points, you can design safeguards before you reach them. That might mean having a friend check in, setting non-negotiable calendar blocks, or creating routines that keep you anchored even when life gets chaotic. It's also important to keep raising the bar. One reason people slide back is because they stop challenging themselves. Growth becomes maintenance, and maintenance eventually becomes complacency. By setting the next target as soon as you hit the last one, you keep your mind and habits forward-focused. But here's the most overlooked part. Celebrate your identity, not just your achievements. Results are fleeting. They can be lost to circumstances outside your control. But the person you become through the process? That's yours to keep. And if you protect that, the results will always follow. So ask yourself now, have you been guarding your new self like something precious? Or have you been assuming it will stay without effort? Because nothing about personal growth is permanent unless you make it so. And here's why this matters. The traps we've talked about: familiar misery, busyness, living by others' agendas, waiting for the right time, self-doubt, the comfort of small wins, and slipping back into your old identity. They're not obstacles you beat once. They're forces you'll face again and again in different seasons of life. But the more aware you are of them, the faster you'll spot them, and the harder it will be for them to hold you back. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present, alert to the patterns, quick to correct your course, committed to staying aligned with the life you've chosen to live. Because in the end, growth isn't just about what you achieve. It's about who you refuse to stop becoming. And if you've made it this far, it means something important. You're no longer walking blind. You see the traps. You know their names. And once you can see them, you can step around them. Now the question is, will you? Pausa. Because the next step in this journey is to learn how to build systems so strong that even when these traps appear, they can't pull you back. And that's exactly what we're going to uncover in the next video.